So there's been a lot of different things in my life that have led me to come to the point of doing organizing and activism work and taking part in social justice movements. I would say definitely I have to, acknowledge my parents. Both of my parents are activists, more or less still so today. Not as active in the streets and stuff like they used to be, but I was definitely brought up around, really finding out a lot about what was going on in the world. They never pressured me to be an activist of any sort, but they more just opened me up to what was going on. When I first started getting into police violence work when I was in high school, I was like 16, 17 years old or so. So about 484 years I've been doing now. Literally about half my life now. I got started doing police violence work when I was, 16, 17. I'm 34 now, so exactly half my existence I've been doing this. My high school was kind of a hotbed for organizing around police, but also it was a school that was, in the middle of LA. And was seen as one of the worst schools in LA. We had a lot of police presence. We had a lot of things happen to students by police right on campus and right around the school. And so experiences of walking home as like a, honor student, still getting strip searched on main streets, having a friend disappear for an entire semester from school and finding out it's because he was not in jail, he was in the hospital with severely broken leg. From an altercation with the police, things like this that have happened throughout my life, where I've seen on multiple occasions these type of things happen, really kind of drove my just experiences of how I felt about police in our communities and the role that they played. In social work school, I think I really started thinking more about the holistic needs of the families we were working with, the people who had their loved ones killed by police, and seeing that all we were really giving them as activists was giving them an outlet for their voice. And well, it's very important, right? And helping them through like court cases and justice system stuff like that. But I felt like all we were doing was being like, something terrible happened to you, it's time for you to stand up and hit the streets. And while a lot of families really wanted to do that and found empowerment through that, we weren't really doing anything to help them heal beyond having that space to share their story. And we weren't doing anything to deal with the fact that, a breadwinner in your family may have been killed and now you can't pay rent. Or, your children's parent has died and now they're going through all kinds of trauma and can't deal with anything at school. Or can't, or having trouble outside of the space and are getting into fights or whatever now and having all kinds of issues or don't even have money to bury their loved one. And so I started seeing the need to really do more holistic work around the needs of people who were being violated by the police. And that's kind of brought me to where I'm at now, working with People's Justice, and also I work really closely with a group called the Radical Social Work Group. And so we really do a lot of work around trying to not only do organizing and activism with families and of people who have faced police violence, but really trying to take it to that next level of really caring for our communities by not just creating that space, but caring for them outside of that space too, and creating that family and community where we're lacking it. I really feel like, there's so racial profiling has a lot of different contexts, right? It happens not only on a level of criminalization of Black and Latino communities, and especially of working class Black and Latino communities in places like New York City, but also happening way beyond that too, like with Muslim populations, whether they're South Asian or Arab, Middle Eastern, or coming from some other space because of their faith, which usually is identified through the color of your skin, right? We know that there's Muslims of all ethnicities all over the world, but it's not everybody that is harassed on a daily basis or surveilled in those ways. And you could name all types of other contexts in the way these happen, with dealing with ICE and immigration work and stuff. And, how do you tell somebody is an immigrant without obviously racial profiling them? You can't just look at somebody and be able to tell where they were born, right? And so there's these multiple ways that racial profiling really shows its face and shows its ugly side. Well, there is no good side to it, right? But really shows its face out here in our society. And so I think there's been a lot of work that's been really great around that. Like last year with the passage of the Community Safety Act, specifically the profiling bill, which made it illegal for police to not only do racial profiling, but to do any other types of profiling, based on religion, based on, orientation, gender identity, age, neighborhood you live in, stuff like that. So basically now, because of that racial profiling or the profiling bill, they're not allowed to profile you on any level. So I think there's been these great victories and these great movements to help stop racial profiling and other kinds of profiling. And at the same time, and this isn't speaking for People's Justice, this is, my own feelings on it. They might agree or might not. But I feel like no matter how many laws we pass on this, racial profiling is part and parcel to how police do their work. In this type of context, and to be totally real, under a capitalist society, I feel like racial profiling is going to be very much a basis for how policing is done, for how oppression, is manifested in our society. Because, capitalism requires people requires poor people in order to have rich people, right? It requires people to be exploited and to be able to be expendable when they're no longer useful to them, right? And the way that manifests in our society is obviously through skin color, right? And that's how it's always been here, from, enslavements and genocides of African folks and obviously the continued genocide of Native folks here in this country, and exploitation and attacks and imperialist attacks and wars against all kinds of Asian countries, South American countries, the government putting their people in to take out righteous leaders who are actually there for the people. See, I would say I'm gonna be totally raw with y'all on how I really feel. And this is not People's Justice, this is my own self. But I'm totally an abolitionist when we're talking about police, prisons, any of this. I don't believe they really serve a purpose in our society beyond control, besides population control, and and of keeping people in power and of protecting the wealth of people who are in power. We can see this from the beginnings of police. They were founded based on slave catchers and union busters who, they're either trying to take back, slave masters' property, AKA people, or trying to prevent people from forming unions and getting better working conditions and better pay, right? And these are the two places where police literally come from. And we can see today how, it's not the neighborhoods that are necessarily the quote unquote ones that need it the most where crime is at. The police are really in neighborhoods where they're gentrifying, right? Where they're trying to raise the value of the land they're in, where they're, Bed-Stuy, Bushwick, places like this, Flatbush, where you're seeing lots of folks who are not from the community moving in, rent skyrocketing, and them trying to get rid of all the people who have lived there. That's where we're seeing police really come in and to protect the people who are moving in with wealth and to keep down the people who are. So, I don't think it's as simple as just saying we shouldn't arrest anybody. I think really, though, what we need to do is look deeper at the issues of what causes crime in our communities, right? Like, I think, there are people who are very sick and are very, already traumatized by their experiences. So there are people who are doing crimes against people that there's really no explanation or justification for. But I think probably 95% of crimes are committed as crimes of need, of people needing to feed their families. People selling drugs aren't out there because that's the cool thing to do necessarily. They're doing it because that's the only way that people want to that they feel they can feed their families in the way that's really going to work. So I think that the conditions between police and communities have improved over the decades. And I will put an asterisk on that and say that it's not improving because the police want to improve or because the people that are in power have changed how they feel at all. It's only changed because people who are being targeted by the police have been able to stand up and fight and make changes, right? And even with that happening, the powers that be are still finding ways around our victories to try to keep themselves in power and keep the same things going. For example, we can look real quick at stop and frisk and how the big lawsuit last year, all the exposure that was done of stop and frisk, and how they're not really doing they're still stopping and frisking people, but way less. But now their new language is broken windows policing, right? So they're not coming up to you just randomly on the street doing nothing. Now they're saying, oh, we think you were selling Lucy's. Oh, you were sleeping on the train. So now we have a right to very aggressively attack you. Oh, you jumped a turnstile. So maybe you didn't have $2.50 to get on, but you needed to get home. So maybe we should just let you go home. But no, we're actually going to take you to jail for this now, right? And so turning things that aren't really even crimes, things that didn't used to be crimes, like, you know, your uncle or auntie drinking a beer on the street didn't used to be a crime. These are things that only got made criminal because they needed to find things to actually, you know, turn people into criminals with. So with that, I would say things have improved only because of the fighting we've done. But the system and the powers that be are constantly finding ways to change and disguise the way that they're doing things to keep communities down. So I think even though things are improving, it's very important that we constantly are trying to reevaluate where we're at and trying to, redevelop the things that we're doing in order to fight back and to get more ground and justice. So that's a very good question. I mean, William Bratton, the new commissioner under de Blasio, has a very long history, not only in New York City, also, nearly a decade in Los Angeles, and before then with Boston, and also in the Bay Area as an advisor, and internationally, going to places like, Israel and places like that to teach them how to better oppress their peoples in a shinier way, right? I think the things, though, that the lessons we've learned over the years of dealing with Bratton, both here in New York as well as in LA, really quickly, that case of Anthony Baez, who was up on the wall, that was '94. That was during Bratton's first term, and we're seeing the parallels coming back. How he was killed, not only the parallels for how he was killed on the chokehold and stuff, but also that it is Bratton back in power when these things are happening. So I think a lot of what we're already seeing is already being exposed as to what we can expect with Bratton and broken windows theory policing as attacks on homeless people, for the big crime of being too poor to have housing, right? Attacks on youth to where they're arresting young people for dancing on the trains and trying to do something positive to make money instead of being out in the street hustling. We're bound to see more of the attacks like there was on Eric Garner, where, broken windows theory policing specifically says that, it's this theory that says that aggressively policing small or petty crimes prevents bigger crimes from happening. And the unfortunate thing that we can really expect to see is that the actual truth is that aggressive policing of petty crimes is going to lead to more crimes being committed by the police, right? This thing turned from allegedly selling a Lucy when the actuality was he had just broken up a fight. It was a peacemaker on the block. But this alleged thing of selling Lucy's turned into a murder, right? People sleeping on the trains has turned into numerous situations of brutality, people getting beat up for falling asleep on their way home from work, right? There's been a 500% increase in young people being arrested on trains for dancing. These are the things we can come to expect. More attacks on young people, especially young people of color, more attacks on homeless people, more attacks on queer communities. We saw crazy amounts of police out at Pride this year, very aggressive with people. I think we can expect a lot more of the same. It's just with a new language. Let's keep fighting.